My name is Sally Traxler, and I'm the director of the Droneport Network, and you are attending the Droneport Seminar. Next up, we're going to talk about operations and what it takes to integrate UAS into airspace that's being used. And I'm incredibly pleased to have Innovets Aerospace with me. Without further ado, I'm going to let Chris and Mike take it away, and I'll be here to help. You can put questions in the chat box, and they'll be monitoring that chat box. And we're going to shorten our lunch period just a little bit. So when this session ends, we will begin again at 1 p.m. as scheduled. So thanks, everybody, for your flexibility. Chris, Mike?
Thanks, Sally. Thanks for the introduction. And welcome to the second session of today's webinar. My name is Chris Yakabi, and with me today is my business partner, Mike Whitted. Together, Mike and I created and operate Innovets. We're a wholly service veteran-owned aerospace advisory management company. Our main offices are in Grand Forks, North Dakota, co-located with the Grand Sky Aviation Park, which is leased off of Grand Forks Air Force Base. And then we have an office in Colorado Springs, actually Monument, just north of Colorado Springs, Colorado. Although we have operated in other locations, and we do have the capability and manpower to operate anywhere nationwide or worldwide for that matter. So Innovets got its start about 6 years ago when the Grand Sky Aviation Park was first in its development stages. And for those of you who aren't familiar yet with Grand Sky Aviation Park, it is a first of its kind commercial UAS park co-located with Grand Forks Air Force Base. Actually, they lease about 230 acres of land off the southwest side of the runway there at Grand Forks Air Force Base, primarily an area that used to be a B-52 alert pad. And they run primarily large fixed-wing UAS right now, although we have flown a lot of small UAS out of there. And I don't want to steal too much of Tom Sawyer's thunder, but he's the gentleman who runs Grand Sky, and he'll be speaking later this afternoon. So anyway, because of Mike's and my background in aviation and airport operations, management training, regulatory expertise, we were brought in to advise state, local, and U.S. government officials with drafting the actual joint use agreement between the Department of Defense and the city and county Grand Forks to allow the Grand Sky Airport to eventually come into existence. We also authored the actual letter of agreement, which is between Grand Forks Air Force Base and Grand Sky. And that gets down to the nitty-gritty of operations, everything from flight planning to coordination with other assets on the airfield, even so far as what radio calls need to be made and call signs when a UAS is operating. And so as a result of the positive relationship that we developed through those negotiations over a few years, Innovets was asked to eventually asked to compete and eventually chosen as the contract operator of the Grand Sky Airpark. So we run the day-to-day operations there. I know that the majority of you are attending today's webinar because you're all fired up about UAS and the opportunities that UAS brings to your communities and your states and maybe your individual businesses. I've got to say, in my 4 years of involvement in aviation professionally, I've never seen a more innovative or disruptive technology affect aviation. I think probably the last big thing to hit aviation was the introduction of the jet engine when we switched from propellers to jets back in the late 50s and early 60s. And this is that kind of disruptive innovation. So it's going to open up a lot of opportunities. And I kind of liken it to the gold rush of the 1800s that we had out here in California, or even the westward expansion of the territories around the same time period, where you had a group of people who, you know, they're all fired up, they're all excited, they want to go out there and dig some gold and, mine for gold, or in the case of westward expansion, go out and stake their claim in the territory. And that's all great. But in order to do that, and in order for that to become a reality, there is a lot of people behind the scenes that are doing all the mundane work, like, registering the claims, selling the tools, the pickaxes, the shovels, creating the roadways so they can get there. And in a modern sense, nowadays you have a lot of environmental concerns, and there's all these different regulations that nobody wants to deal with because they just want to go out there and, start digging for gold. So in a modern sense, that's what Mike and I really do. I mean, quite frankly, we do all the work that no one else wants to do. So, matter of fact, we might want to change our motto to Innovets. We do all the stuff you don't want to do. And when I mentioned that to Mike, he said, yeah, and some stuff people don't even know that they have to do. So we ensure compliance with all the, we keep pace with all the changes and the regulations. We ensure compliance so that the operators can just do their thing and fly their UAS and not worry about getting into trouble with the FAA or any other regulatory component. So as far as that goes, that's pretty much a background. I'm going to turn it over to Mike. Mike is our chief of operations, actually chief CEO, and he's going to talk about the day-to-day. And please ask questions throughout. We'll be taking a look at those on the chat line. And if for some reason we don't get to your question, you can get a hold of us through our website, which there'll be a slide on that, innovets.net, and we'll be happy to get back to you. So with that, Mike.
Thanks, Chris. And good morning, everybody, and thanks for joining us today. I will warn you, for everybody watching, I am a pilot and I will talk with my hands a lot. So please bear with me. I like to be animated when I speak. So let's start with kind of just in general. We're going to run through some of the things that we've seen through operating at the Grand Sky Aviation Park and just sort of throughout the industry over the last number of years. And we'd like to go through some of the lessons learned that we've had, some of the sort of key factors to success if you are in the market to either start or grow or develop, a drone port of your own. This is very much a rapidly moving industry, just as Chris mentioned, and we very much want everyone to be successful wherever they happen to be, because it's an industry that the greater job that we do supporting each other, even though you may be competing with other people who also operate a drone port, the better job that we can do as a whole of making sure that everyone is moving forward in a safe way, in a productive way, and integrating well with pre-existing regulation by the FAA or other governing agencies, the better it is for the industry as a whole. So we all kind of win together. So let's start with kind of why a drone port? How do I go about, building something out that people are going to want to come fly at? Unfortunately, this is not field of dreams. So, if you build it, they may or may not actually come. So, the point there is, if you are looking to build and develop or grow a current drone port facility, a launching point area for different type of UAS, a different type of unmanned aircraft, the best way to do that from an efficiency or effectiveness standpoint, in order to actually draw in tenants and customers and manufacturers and operators and people that support that, is to very effectively build out an ecosystem that provides a great number of benefit to the group as a whole. Unfortunately, and to be very blunt about it, flying unmanned aircraft in and around an airport facility is very complicated, and it comes with a lot of different types of overhead that that is kind of a negative factor for people who, operators and different companies who, want to expand and grow their business and what they're doing. It comes with a lot of overhead, and some of that is, financial, just in some of the manning and support that we're going to talk about today. A lot of it is in regulation and protocol and oversight and following the rules. There's a significant amount of overhead in rule following that makes it difficult to operate an unmanned aircraft in the vicinity of an airport. So if your goal is to build out a drone port, even if you were in a location that is relatively slow from a traffic standpoint, or maybe not in a controlled airfield, some places where the protocols might be a little bit less, your success will be based on bringing in more customers, and more customers, more operators means that the airspace very quickly becomes more complicated. So you will be almost a victim of your own success, in the sense that you want it to be complicated because you want a lot of customers, you want a lot of operations and things going on. So in order to do that successfully, you need to focus on creating an ecosystem where a lot of different types of entities that all support this same, industry can benefit by being in a common place together, kind of a community of practice, sort of the Silicon Valley mentality of, having a lot of like-minded companies and operators and people and support all in one geographic location. So how do you do that? What are some of the background things that that you will need to take into consideration? And we're going to run through a list that we've experienced and had to work with. And this is not an all-encompassing list, but a lot of that has to do with your individual situation and basis that you're operating on. So first and foremost, it is in your best interest to define the customer. So when we say, we're operating a drone port, what do we mean by drone? This is it's a technology sector that has just grown rapidly, and with the more growth in manufacturing and technological capability, there are constantly more and more types of aircraft that are unmanned that all kind of wear this hat that's, drone. So for your location, you need to determine what your customer base is, or what your anticipated customer base is, depending on what your long-term strategy is, what the benefits at your location is. So if you're in a location where you're expecting to maybe perpetuate the growth of maybe small UAS that are cargo carriers, or maybe you're in a situation like Grand Sky was in and has been in, where really one of your big benefits and one of the focuses are in large UAS being needing the use of a runway. So as sort of how we, there obviously are a lot of categories of UAS, but in our situation, Grand Sky had that benefit. And so that was, that's been a focus of Grand Sky operations and the tenants that we'd like to bring there. That may not be the case for you. In your situation, maybe you benefit by the fact that you have an operating location that's lower traffic, so you have lots of wide open airspace. Maybe it's uncontrolled, and maybe your target market is more in the smaller UAS market. And obviously there's a wide range, and everything from quadcopters to large fixed wing aircraft that use the runway to everything in between, rail launched. As the capability grows, the technology capability grows, that definition becomes more important because there's a lot more to choose from. So you have to start by defining what your target customer is, because that will lead to how you determine the actual logistical and support needs. Everything that we're getting ready to talk about here afterwards, it all stems from who's your target market. and who is your target customer and tenant and operational tenant. So in our case, like I said, at Grand Sky, primarily, our primary operators are large companies with large aircraft that need the use of a runway, and that's led to a lot of very specific needs that we help provide and that we've seen that we need at that location. We do also support, much smaller operations, and for example, we've supported a lot of launching for operations like FAA testing on sense and avoid, and some procedural testing, working closely with partners up there. So Grand Sky is also very well suited for that, because we not only have an agreement, like Chris mentioned before, to use an Air Force runway, very significant, very large runway, which opens the possibilities to us. But we also have a total of 217 acres and a lot of wide open space where, we can kind of custom tailor any launch needs for even smaller operators if that becomes a need. So, okay, so let's talk about what some of the and support needs are that you can expect to see, that we've seen, to help you prepare yourself for, setting up your drone port, and the things that you need to kind of have in mind in the background to be that, gold rush hardware store operator, like Chris mentioned. That's basically, you want to make sure you have the right tools in your store that you're, providing to the people who are out there operating and moving quickly in that industry. So one of the first things that you need to be aware of at your location is the ability to provide the right type of space for your operators to operate out of. So, for example, in our case, that could be hangar space, because we're operating with very large aircraft. In some cases, it'll be office space. It could be like a warehousing area for manufacturing. It could be a large data center type space. But the ability to customize space or provide a very flexible area for operators to operate out of, or your support group to operate out of, is critical. You need to have a nice, friendly home for people to move into. And frankly, that's one of the strengths of Grand Sky, because we were able to work with Grand Sky Development Corporation, who are experts in property development, construction, taking customer needs, just like I'm talking about right now, and turning that into a physical location for them to operate out of. That's one of the things that we've learned is a fantastic strength of Grand Sky at large. So customizable space and the ability to understand what that need is and what the space need is going to be is tremendous. Another support need that you want to be aware of and make sure that you are on top of is security. That could be a wide range. Obviously, physical security. The more sophisticated your customer base is, or your operator base is, the more security needs you will have. So a big portion of that is going to be physical security. So, for example, at Grand Sky, we have a security, locked gates, keyed entry. We have a sheriff who's on duty Monday through Friday, fenced off, gated. So there's a physical security aspect that helps protect any of our operators who are on the park and operating their equipment. Along the lines of security, another avenue that you need to be aware of in your planning process and your overall strategy is in intellectual property security. So again, the more sophisticated your customer base is, the more likely it is that they will want to protect some aspect of their intellectual property. And that could mean a lot of different things. So from a strategy standpoint and from a security aspect, you need to have the planning and wherewithal to understand that your goal to be successful is to have a lot of operators. And, you could have a lot of operators who are competitors with each other. And if you have a lot of operators who are competitors with each other, there's an amount of information sharing that benefits the group, but there's each operator also stays really, really close to protecting their own intellectual property, because ultimately that is profit for them. So security, another aspect. There are a lot of different ways that you need to take into account and plan for making sure that that's covered. Another really big ticket item need that is not necessarily a traditional airport need as much or to the same level is high-speed network and bandwidth capability. So in our case at Grand Sky, it is on property for an Air Force base that is currently operating large UAS. So we had a tremendous benefit, or Grand Sky did, our group, when we moved in and started to operate, we had a tremendous benefit of being in close proximity to a high density fiber, pipeline just right off property. And so that in the world of UAS, clearly data is king. So your operators need to be able to operate, but they also need to be able to give that information to somebody, or at least test their ability to give that information to somebody. And so your ability to provide a high density bandwidth and networking capability will be critical. And that may be an area where you might benefit by wanting to start a drone port somewhere that's a little bit more remote because the airspace is wide open. There are benefits to that, but then you also need to take into consideration what's your network capability at your location and how do you support that network backbone. Another, big consideration, and this is very, very customer dependent as are all of the other needs I'm mentioning. So depending on the size of your aircraft, a lot of your smaller UAS are still electrical battery operated. However, it's if you're looking at operating a drone port with large aircraft that need a runway, for example, or with the technology evolving, more and more of the kind of medium-sized aircraft are starting to use fuel of different types. So fuel provisioning is a very big topic. And again, if you're looking at a pre-existing airport location that has fuel available, well, you need to also ensure that you have all of the right types of fuel available. So, for example, at Grand Sky, we've had smaller aircraft that use battery and electricity that is not necessarily provided by us, but they also, we have aircraft that use avgas and also jet fuel. And so the ability to provision fuel to all different, types of aircraft that are going to operate out of there is, again, it's critical. So fuel planning is always big strategy. Just make sure that you have the infrastructure available and ready to go. Vehicle operations. Vehicle operations are really big. If you live or if you're operating in a very remote area, kind of a municipal airport type location that's, again, has the added benefit of airspace is quiet, but you're a little ways out of town, you may need to consider things like making sure that you have transportation to and from the site for people who want to be in place for maybe 2 weeks so they can run some initial testing, transient crews. In our case, because we operate on a ramp and an active large runway, we have to have the ability to not only tow aircraft, but vehicle operations also feed into aspects like training for flight line driver's licenses and making sure that that we're adhering to all of the ground operations rules that come with, operating in an FAA location, or in our case, a DoD location as well. So transportation and towing and the ability to support aircraft that way, also another big factor. Wildlife management. This is one that a lot of times kind of gets overlooked. So again, as you're planning out and, building a strategy for long-term for operations at a drone port, you need to take into consideration what type of support functions are already there and which ones you're going to have to create on your own. So as far as wildlife management, we have the benefit at Grand Sky of operating in an Air Force location where there is already a wildlife management program in place for things like scaring birds away, keeping moose from running across the ramp, or whatever the case may be. There are a lot of factors in wildlife management that will not be in existence in a smaller location that you may want to operate out of. So make sure you have a plan. Yeah, ultimately, if you are operating in a remote location, a smaller airport facility, using smaller UAS, clearly things like bird strikes will really ruin your day. So the ability to just oversee and manage that, and maybe do what it takes to potentially scare birds away, or keep the wildlife away from your equipment or your operators, your tenants' equipment. Other big concerns, environmental. So support for environmental concerns and having kind of an environmental plan. So what I mean by that are a number of things. In our case, we're in North Dakota. So snow is a huge, and cold weather operations is a very, very big consideration for us. So if you are, building out, growing, planning on having more customers, you may have to take into consideration things like snow plowing. It could be things like winds. Are you, as you're building out your ultimate goal and strategy of creating this safe and productive environment or ecosystem for UAS to operate out of, you in a place where the weather is flyable or beneficial for whatever your particular aircraft are going to be. Winds are another big thing. If you have historical winds that are either what would be outside of crosswind limits, or maybe outside of the capability of the particular aircraft or equipment that is going to be operating there, that might not be the best place to operate. Another environmental concern to be aware of is just accurate weather reading in remote locations. Currently, we're actually in the testing phase of providing some weather reading and monitoring equipment that's deployable to forward locations. So most airport facilities are going to have some level and capability for weather forecasting and weather reading. However, in a lot of smaller areas, typically it's an interpolation of weather readings around. So,
hey, Mike, I'm going to jump in on the environmental. Sorry, I mean, interrupt your flow, but also things like hazmat. You may be introducing other substances that were not normally at your airport, like the batteries, for example. And there's environmental regulations that you're going to have to make sure you comply with for safe disposal of these materials that may not have been there before, fuel, batteries, there's all kinds of stuff. So that's another environmental issue. Just toss in there. Sorry, Mike.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thanks, Chris. You bet. And so next, a big consideration that you want to take and think about and plan for safety programs. So it's very likely that there are a lot of flying safety programs or ground safety programs in place if you were at a pre-existing airport with, an operational tower and a fairly substantial support network there already. However, if you are building a drone port in a place where there's less traffic to begin with already, it's important to know that your operators may not have a pre-existing plan or identity or expectation of what their safety program should be, or even what a flying safety program is, or a ground safety program. So, some of what we did and do at Grand Sky is helping to author some of the operating agreements and internal safety plans for operators at the park, and That includes everything from, a snow day plan to, operations on the ramp to adhering to our host Air Force guidelines and procedures. So safety programs are critical. And next up is probably one of my favorite topics that is really, it's going to be your bread and butter, or probably one of the biggest sticking points, has to do with airspace. So airspace, when you're talking about manned or unmanned aircraft, or particularly the integration of manned and unmanned aircraft and unmanned aircraft of different sizes, the airspace is critical. So your customers need to be able to have access to that airspace, and that takes a really well-versed understanding in air traffic control procedures, what the airspace looks like. Maybe they're not just at that location specifically, but what's your proximity to approach or departure corridors, maybe from another airport that's nearby. Dealing with air traffic control in the sense that, you need to be able to translate needs to, the host agencies in airspace. And I'm going to just do a very, very quick file share. Please bear with me for a second. And just to give you a quick look at what the airspace at Grand Sky looks like. So you can see KRDR is Grand Forks Air Force Base. Their little oversight, that red half moon on the, overhead, the base is a constant temporary flight restriction. And I say constant because there's a temporary flight restriction that has to do with government use. So both the DoD, the Air Force, Customs and Border Patrol, there are a lot of government agencies that operate unmanned aircraft out of there. And our segment, or our area, if you look over on the airport diagram on the left, and this little rectangle that I have set over here, what used to be the B-52 ramp is now Grand Sky. And so that's the ramp that we operate off of. So our field, our air park sits underneath this TFR. Other things that we always have to constantly integrate with and take into consideration. Just about 10 miles to the east of us is Grand Forks International, where the University of North Dakota operates a very, very busy flight school. It's busy. And so your ability to understand that, and sorry, I got to stop in here. Your ability to understand that in the integrated ops is critical. Airspace is crucial to integration and working with the FAA and getting your programs where they need to be. As part of that airspace, right now in the industry, beyond visual line of sight capability is sort of one of the leading aspects and factors of promoting productive operations. So at Grand Sky, we started with, we've had chase aircraft operations, which allowed, aircraft to go out to different operating areas, run maneuvers, and over time we've been allowed to morph into the ability to provide beyond visual line of sight capability in conjunction with the Air Force and using feeds from their radar facility, as well as working with Northern Plains UAS test site. So BVLOS is huge. Your ability to provide that is going to be also critical. Okay, so that's just a number of quick things that we have seen. It's not all exhaustive. Everything is very dependent. Everything that you plan for, your strategy, your support needs. We like to joke that unmanned aircraft is a very misleading term, because in order to actually run unmanned operations, it takes a lot of people, a lot of support, doing a lot of different factors.
Mike, I'm sorry. Yeah, to jump in. So I think you're going to talk about lessons learned next. Is that correct?
I was going to run through lessons learned, and I have a few questions, so I was going to address them.
Okay, yeah, I was going to get to that. So one of the questions that came up is, talking about different strategies when working with federal state officials. Um, I'll answer that a little bit, and then you can jump in here, Mike. The biggest thing when dealing with any of these agencies is, well, there's a couple things. I mean, it really comes down with establishing the proper relationship. And along with establishing that proper relationship is credibility, trust, and just, developing a nice rapport. So, for example, we have a very good relationship with the Minneapolis Control Center. We have a very good relationship with the airspace manager at Grand Forks Air Force Base. We have a good relationship with the city and county Grand Forks, the senator, the congressman, the governor, their offices. So we liaison with all these people. And quite frankly, before the pandemic, we did that personally. I mean, you need to develop a good, I think, personal relationship with these different agencies and the points of contact so that you can speak freely and, get these things going. But I can't overstress the credibility aspect, meaning just do what you say you're going to do, and make sure you follow the rules and be open and just try to play along with everybody. Okay, Mike, sorry.
Yeah, no, thanks, Chris. And yeah, exactly. And so some of the lessons that we learned along the way are very much what Chris just said. One of the biggest things that we've figured out, we've managed to do right over time, which has helped open the door to more things, is simply following the rules. And your ability to follow the rules is very dependent on your ability to understand what the rules are. So in this world, clearly Chris and I have a few different sets of rules that we have to operate under because we operate at a location that's not only governed by FAA rules, but also DoD implementations and rules. So it's kind of like understanding tax code, right? There's a lot of it out there. And the better job you do of understanding it and navigating the rules appropriately, the less likely you are to get shut down or, audited or whatever. So learn your rules, follow the rules. That helps everyone's level of comfort, because there is a governing agency everywhere you are, whether it's, your state economic development council, the FAA, maybe, DoD in our case. There are governing agencies watching what this entire industry is doing. Your ability to understand their rules and operate in them will greatly increase their comfort level with you to be able to ask to do more. And so technology will always move faster than the rules, procedures, and protocols. And the best job that you can do to keep up with the rules along the way without violating them, it will allow you to make the rules move faster along with the technology. So know your rules and try to follow them the best you can. So another lesson learned that we had that was early on, and this comes to do with some of the other questions we received as far as like preparing the community and continuous ongoing negotiation with state and federal agencies. Communication is absolutely essential, and that's both from you, the parent organization, to the operators, the tenants, your customers, giving them a reasonable expectation of what the different rules are, what your abilities as a drone park provider are, what you can and can't do. So having a line of communication to them, but also having a very stable line of communication from your customers or tenants back to the governing agencies, and your ability to voice concerns and what they want to do and what they're doing to try to mitigate safety risks. Communication is absolutely essential. Another big lesson learned, and I think this is true everywhere, but particularly in a rapidly moving industry such as anything involving UAS or technology, is patience. The technology capabilities will always outpace the rule sets. They will always outpace the regulation. and it's a lot of times operators like to talk badly about the FAA because, here they are, they have all this capability, but they're getting held back by rules. Well, in reality, the FAA's job is to make sure that flying operations are safe. And so you have to be patient. The communication is key, and you have to be patient, follow the rules, and take what you can get when you can get it. When there's a new allowance, take it, work together with groups to make sure it's more of a team effort than just you being out there advertising to the world that you can do this, and big bad FAA is holding you back. That is not productive. So be patient. We always talk about a lot of the things that happen are kind of like in the movie Inception, right? The operators or customers have to plant the idea with the FAA of this is capable, plant the idea in their brain, and eventually it will, grow and develop into an idea that the governing agencies are comfortable with. And then the last thing that I'd like to speak to as far as lessons learned, and this is probably, and not probably, this is absolutely the most important lesson learned that we've had at Grand Sky as to why Grand Sky has been able to be successful. And it's teamwork. It's just a matter of understanding what your network of support functions are. If you are the Droneport operator, for example, rely on the very good and talented people around you. And so in our case, the Northern Plains UAS test site, having them located and providing a tremendous amount of support and, mentoring not only for us, but also for our operators and doing things like test flying and understanding what the airspace limitations are and what can be done is tremendous. I can't say enough good things about Grand Sky, the parent organization at Grand Sky and Grand Sky Development Company, their ability to, not only market to the world as to what's out there, but also provide so many of those structural needs, like the property development, the construction, the, negotiating with, local politicians or negotiating with the base, our host agency, absolutely crucial. Our operational partners have been great from a teamwork standpoint in the sense that a lot of times they'll come to us and want to fly, and we have to essentially lay out a very long list of rules, and they have to live with them. And everyone, that we've worked with has been so fantastic to try to work within our rules, but that helps us as a group, right? The second that we have any one person or agency that doesn't want to play by the rules, well, it could shut down the entire Droneport, the entire operation. So operational partners, political support in the state of North Dakota has been fantastic. Just not only in and around the community, but seeing the benefits economically and, from a notoriety standpoint, being able to create this ecosystem, like I mentioned, that has so many benefits. The support functions on the ground are fantastic. The airspace usage are great because of some of the other partners that have been, working along, like I mentioned. And so the teamwork aspect has been the biggest strength of our location at Grand Sky, and it will continue to be. It will be the biggest strength for you as well if your goal is to build or grow a drone port, is to just work with the good people around you. And I'm going to stop. We're down to about a minute. And
so Mike, I'm going to tag on a couple things, and then Sally said we could run over a couple minutes and we can take some questions here. There's a couple questions popping up. I think they're really good. Mike spent a lot of time talking about rule following. And, one of the important things is nobody likes rules, but here's the deal. You're going to spend, in our case, literally years building up this drone park before you even fly your first drone. And then, you're going to bring in all these business partners, hopefully, or tenants. And you're creating this reputation that takes years to develop, but you can totally destroy the reputation of everybody, not just your own, but the park and all the other tenants in an instant by violating, getting violated by the FAA. So you need somebody to keep track of all the changes, and that's kind of what we do. So great job, Mike. I mean, I really appreciate everything you said. There's some good questions. Phil asked, is a mobile unit for airspace safety monitoring communications a realistic early strategy to support local VTOL operators? It's a great question, Phil. So we're talking about how in Grand Sky, we had this regulatory environment, airspace requirements and all. When we actually flew the first UAS, it was a small 55-pounder by one of the local tenants there. And we actually, we literally had I was on a handheld radio talking to the tower coordinating the operation. So yes, for early operations, it can be as simple as having a handheld radio, maybe a laptop or even your phone with local weather, and you can start small like that. Mike, you want anything to that, or do you agree?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point. It is a very good question, and don't let your current support function limit what you want to do or what you plan to do. So everyone has to start from somewhere. Yeah, our early operations, Chris and our employees, our team worked out of a car. The office space was a construction trailer. And so, yes, the short answer to your question is, yeah, absolutely. If you have mobile units, get started. And, our goal today was to try to give you kind of a little bit of a roadmap of maybe bigger things to expect, but don't let your current situation hold you back from, getting started. So
another question here, Mike, what emerging technologies within the U.S. airspace do you see are going to be the most impactful for the short term concerning drone ports? UTM, remote ID, 5G access?
all of the above. I mean, it's a very good question. It's difficult to say which technology will lead the way. As I mentioned before, the airspace interaction is really, I think, what kind of the guiding principle is. So that, the UTM process and sort of setting up national airspace to incorporate drones, as well as the beyond visual line of sight rules, the radar support, all of those type of technologies, I think, will be kind of at the forefront, but it's very difficult to say because everything technology based, I could give you a totally different answer next week.
Yeah, I think airspace integration is probably the biggest thing because you can have all the technology in the world, but if you can't integrate it into the existing airspace, for example, you've got a bunch of manned aircraft flying around, and they're talking about this UTM thing, which is below that airspace, but there's some that are going to impinge upon the manned airspace, and it all has to be integrated. In the manned systems, there's all kinds of data link and all ADS-B and all these great things, but not all the aircraft are equipped for them. So that's going to be an issue, integrating all that. So we got to a few questions here. I know we need to cut this short. We're happy to take questions offline. You can get a hold of us at info@innovets.net. That's our website. We'd love to hear from you. If we can answer your questions or even help out in any way, we're more than happy to do so. And appreciate your time today. Mike, any last words?
No, that's it. Thank you, everybody, for joining us.